Hello everyone! In this series of videos, we'll see how to create an inventory system in Unreal Engine 5 using Blue. So for this video, I created a folder called Inventory. Right now the folder is empty. This is where I will store everything related to the inventory logic. I'm gonna double click on it and open it. And in there, the first thing I'm gonna do is create the actual inventory component. So I'm gonna right click, choose Blueprint class, and I'm gonna choose an actor component. I will call that BPC for Blueprint Component underscore inventory. This component will be attached to the main character. At the moment, we have nothing in there. And what I'm going to do is go into the blueprint for the third person character. I'm going to open that. I'm going to add a component. I'm going to look for inventory. You can see that BPC inventory pops up. Choose that. I won't change the name, I'm just going to leave that as BPC inventory. So now our character has an inventory, but the inventory is empty and there's nothing yet. We also do not have any items to pick up and put in this inventory. So I'm going to go back into my inventory folder, and in there I'm going to create the logic to create as many objects as we want in the game that we can pick up and add into this inventory. So to create objects, I'm going to right click, choose blueprint, and in this case I'm going to create a specific type of blueprints. I'm going to choose the structure blueprint or struct. I'm going to call that struct item. This blueprint here, when you open it, you can see that you have by default one variable, and you have this button to add as many variables as you want. This structure will be the base of all the items in the game. This is where we're going to define every parameters and every variable related to objects. So for example, I'm going to change the first one to name, and I'm going to change the type to string. So now every object that I will create using this pattern, this structure, will have one variable called name. This is definitely not enough for any objects in the game, so let's add a description too, which also will be a string. And let's add another variable like, let's say, a boolean called is a weapon, to know if the object we are picking up and will be using is a weapon. And from there you can create as many variables as you want depending on the needs of your game. A good thing you can do is add a texture. So I'm going to name that image, choose a texture, texture 2D, and this is something you can use to have, for example, an icon in the UI of the inventory. So right now I'm going to stop here, leave those four variables, and I'm going to save the structural item. As I just mentioned, this struct will be the base of all the items in our game. So we have this base class, this base structure, but we don't have any items yet. So to create them, now it's going to be very simple. If you do right click and choose miscellaneous, you're going to look for a data table. You can see that you can choose a row structure here. You can see there's a lot of things available. None of them really matters to us, except the one at the bottom called struct item, which is the exact same name of the structure we just created. So I'm going to choose that and press OK. I'm going to rename this new object DT. So, rename DT. And in that case, I want to create a sword, so I'm going to call that DT sword. We can see that once I open that, the data table seems to be empty. This is because we need to click on add at the very top, which will add a new row to the data table. The moment I do that, we can see a new row with all the variables we just defined in our structure item. So you can see image, if it's a weapon, name, description. So in this case, this object will just be called sword. Description, well, it's a sword, so just it's a sword. And yes, this is a weapon. I'm not going to choose the image because I don't have any sprites at the moment, but you can just look at that later on, and we'll see in a later video how to display this inventory into a UI to see what objects we have. And finally, one last thing I like to do is that by default, if I make everything slightly bigger, we can see that this is all the variables we have, but the row name is simply called new row by default. So I'm just gonna right click and press rename and just call that item. So I'm gonna save that. And this is all we need to do for the actual structure of the item. So I can close this, I can close the struct item too. And now I'm gonna go into the BPC inventory that we created at the beginning of this video. I'm gonna delete all the functions. I'm gonna save. And now I'm gonna create a new variables in here, which I will call inventory. And by default, we have a Boolean type. That's not what we're looking for. What we want is a struct item once again, because this inventory variable will store all the objects that we are creating in the game, all the objects we can collect and add to the inventory or remove from the inventory. So I'm going to click on struct item. If I simply leave everything at that, our inventory is going to be able to only hold one item. So what I want to do is change the type, the variable type, from single to array. So now the inventory can have multiple objects in it, not just one object, multiple ones. And an inventory system is pretty much an array of whatever objects exist in the game. So we just need this one variable called inventory. Make sure this is an array of the type of things we want to store in the inventory, which in our case is a bunch of struct items. I'm going to compile. Everything seems fine. So now that we have an inventory, we also can have objects. We need a way to add those objects into the inventory. So I'm going to create a functions here. And I'm going to call that add to inventory. So this add to inventory function, well, what we want to do is get our inventory and we want to add things to it. So from the inventory pin, I'm going to drag it and look for add. In this case, the add I want is the add from the array utilities section. I don't want to use the add operator because this is not what we're doing. And I'm just going to click on add here. We can see that we can connect that to the function. We can add anything to the inventory, but we need to add an item here and we don't really have an item yet. This is because in the inputs of the add to inventory function, I need to create a new input, which I will call an item. We want to add one item to the inventory. And because the item follows the same structures we've been creating, I'm going to look for struct item. And I can connect that into this add function. So what we're doing is very simple, is that we have a function to add an object to the inventory. This object needs to fit the pattern of the inventory, which is a structure item, which we just created. And this is it. This is pretty much all we need to do to add any objects to the inventory. So I can save and compile. Everything seems to be working fine. So now that we have our logic to add an item to an inventory, we need to find an actual item in the game. And we need to be able to interact with this object and pick up the object to put it into the inventory. We have the logic to have the actual inventory, but we need this pickup logic too. In my case, I have a BP interactable class here, where I implemented an interact interface. I won't dive too much in this video on how to do that. However, I have another video that explains how to create an interface to have an interaction with objects in Unreal Engine. So I'm gonna go from there, and I will put a link to this video in the description. In this case, I'm gonna open this BP interactable I have, and I have this interact interface that's already implemented. From there, what I'm gonna do is I want to cast this object to the third person character. And to cast, I need an object here, which is getController. If I compile, we can see this is not getController, it's getPlayer character. And if I compile, this should be working fine. So I have my event track that's linked to the cast to the third person character, and as the object we have the getPlayer character. From there, as the BP third person character, I want to get the inventory component we created. So get BP's inventory. And from this, I want to use the function add to inventory. And I want to connect the cast into this function add to inventory. If I compile, everything seems fine, but we're not adding any item yet. We can see that the pin for whatever item we want to add is not connected to anything. So in this case, for this BP interactable, I'm going to create a new variable called object to loot. You can find a better name than that, but hopefully this is clear enough for the purpose of this tutorial. And this, I won't look for a structural item this time, I will look for a data table. So if I look for data table, here we go, data table, object reference. So I'm gonna get this data table, but we can see that it won't connect to the item yet. This is because we need a function from the data table. So if I drag the pin from this object to loot variable and look for get row, we can see that we have a utilities function called get data table row. And this is what we're gonna want. So I'm gonna move the pins from before, drag that a bit on the right. It is connect the cast into this get data table row. In this case, I'm looking for a specific data table, which is the object to loot we want. And I'm gonna change the row name to item. And once the row is found, I get row found and I connect that into the add to inventory. And once we have something, the add row will be connected to the item. So to explain a bit more on what's happening here, we created a structural item, and from there we can create as many data tables as we want that will represent every object that we can store into the inventory of our game. In that case, we have one object so far called data table sword or DT sword. It has multiple variables and it is stored as a data table. What we're doing here when we are interacting with an object is that we have an interaction. We can be able to pick up the object. Once this happens, we need to cast that to the third person character so we can access the inventory component we created at the beginning. Once we access this inventory component, we can access the function we called add to inventory, which allows us to add an item to the inventory. However, we need to know what item we are adding. To do that, we are creating a variable called object to loot, which will be a data table which will store the values of whatever objects we want to have. And to get from a data table to an actual item to add to the inventory, we just need to use this function get data table row, which will simply tell us all the variables of this data table and convert that into the structural item so we can add that directly into the inventory. And the last touch that will make everything make more sense now is I need to change this object to loot variable from private to public by simply clicking here on the I button. I'm going to compile and save. My BP interactable, I will drag this object into the world, and once this is into the world, we can see that we have this object to loot variable here that is by default empty. And once I click here, I can choose different data tables. So in that case, we only have one called DT sword, but let's say I want to create a new one. So I'm going to go into the inventory, Control C, Control V on data sword, and then I'm just going to rename that to, let's say, data shield. Just going to open that very quickly and change the text to shield and text to its shield. So I'm going to leave that as a weapon even though it's not really true. And now if I click back into my BP interactables in my scene, into object to loot, you can see that we have a new object, data shield or data sword here. So here this one is going to be a sword and this other one here is going to be shield. So for every object that you can collect in the world, you will be able to access the object to loot, or in other words, all the informations regarding this object directly into your interactable. And to make sure everything is fine, in the inventory, the BPC inventory blueprint, I will simply add a print string. And in here, I'm gonna get a break structural item. We can see all the values here. Let's say name. So by doing that, I'm getting all the variables of the structural item we're gonna pick up and add to the inventory, and I'm just gonna get the name one to print to make sure that every time we add to the inventory, it's working. I actually just changed the code a bit to make sure that we have a text that makes more sense. So I'm appending two strings together, one saying that I added the following items to the inventory, and then it will add the name of whatever items we're picking up. I'm gonna save. Now that I'm in play mode, I can see that when I come to those objects, I have the pickup text for the interaction logic. If I press my E button, you can see that we added to the inventory the following item, shield, and if I go here, it's gonna say sword. Added item to the inventory, sword. So this is it for this video. We saw how to create items, how to add them to an inventory, but in the next video we'll see how to update this inventory when you have multiple items. And later on, we also see how to display an inventory UI to see what is actually currently in our inventory. So this is it for this video, and I will see you in the next one. Hello everyone. In the previous video, we saw how to create an inventory system, and in this video, we see how to display this inventory system into a UI widget. To do so, the first thing I'm going to need to do is to go into my inventory folder, and when I right click in the content browser, look for user interface and look for widget blueprint. In that case, I want to choose user widget. I'm gonna call that WB for widget blueprint and inventory. I'm gonna open this widget blueprint. This is where we'll display every item that is stored inside the inventory. I will look for a canvas into the palette, in this case canvas panel. I'm gonna drag and drop this under WB inventory. I will also look for a text, which I will drag and drop into this canvas panel. And this text, I will rename that inventory title. And the text of its content would be changed from text block to inventory. Back into the palette, I will search for a vertical box. Now drag and drop this vertical box into the canvas panel, and inside this vertical box, this is where I'll display every item that is inside the inventory. It will be displayed vertically, and all of that, the inventory title, I'm going to move the title that I created a bit more on the right side, so it's still on the left side but not in the corner. And same for the box, I will make it bigger and drag that right under the inventory. So inside this vertical box, as I just mentioned, I will put all of the different items and it will display all of those items. So instead of manually adding a text for every item and do that for all of them, what I'm going to do is go back into the content browser and create a new user interface. So right click, user interface, widget blueprint. I choose user widget here, WB, and I'm going to call that item slot. In this item slot, this is what I will use to refer to all the items and what I will use into my WB inventory. To keep it simple, I'm going to just look for a text. Actually, I'm going to look for canvas panel first. I'm going to drag it under the WB item slot, and then I'm going to look for text. Drag the first text under canvas panel and drag a second one once again under canvas panel. First text, I will change the variable name to being item name, and I will check the is variable box here. This way I make this text block a variable. For the second text, I'm going to name it item quantity to display the quantity of items we have, and this will also be a variable. So I'm going to move those two next to each other, just making sure they are aligned. Yes. And finally, for this whole widget, what I'm going to change is I want it to not be a fill screen here. By default, it is automatically set to fill screen. What I want is the size to be desired. This way, the size of this widget is only the size of the elements that it contains. In that case, only 2 text blocks. So I'm going to compile, save, go back into my widget blueprint inventory, And in my palette, I can now look for an item slot, which will show me the WB item slot. I'm going to drag this into the vertical box. And the whole idea is that for every item we have, this vertical box will display all of them, and in a vertical way. And we can see we have the text blocks on the left and the right side that correspond to the name and the quantity. By default, they are just set as text block. But if I do that, I can create as many items as I want inside the widget designer. But this will not really translate into an actual video game, because when you're in a game, you pick up items, you remove items from the inventory. There's a lot of things that go, a lot of things that moves, a lot of changes, and we need to have a way to reflect that programmatically. So I'm just going to delete those two item slots. I don't need them. I'm going to compile my inventory, save it. I'm going to minimize the window because we'll come back to it at one point. So I've created this widget inventory, this user widget inventory, but I need a way to display it for the user to see. To do that, I'm going to go into the content. I'm going to look into the third person folder, and I'm going to go into the folder, the input folder, go into the actions, and in there I'm going to create a new action. So I'm going to right click into the content browser and look for input, in that case input action. I'm going to name that IA inventory, open it, and in the triggers of the action I'm going to add a new trigger. So I'm going to add an element, and I will choose pressed here. I'm going to save and close that. Now back into the input folder, I will open the IMC default, and here we can see all the mappings that are inside the game. We have the jump, we have move, we have look, we also have an interact mapping for every time we interact with objects. Here I will add a new action. By default this action is set to none. I will look for IA inventory, the action we just created. Here we have the keyboard button. If I click on it and press I on my keyboard, this will automatically attribute this I key to the action. So what this means, what we've created here, is every time I press the I key, it triggers an action, which the main goal of this action is to show and display the inventory to the user. And if I press this key again, it will hide the inventory. So now we have an action, we need to add some logic to it, so it will display the inventory. For the IMC default, I can close that because that's all we need to do. I will finally go into the third person folder again, go into blueprints, and open the BP third person blueprint. In the third person character blueprint, I can now look for a node, which will be IA inventory. And the idea is, as I mentioned, every time I press the I key on my keyboard, the key I assigned to the action, I will open the inventory, which will display the widget we created. And if I want to close this inventory widget, I can just simply press the same key again. To do that, there's a node called flip-flop that does exactly this. The flip-flop nodes interact between two outputs, like A and B. So every time I press I, this will display the first behavior of the A pin here, and if I press it again, it will go into the B behavior. So this is exactly what we need. We press I to show the inventory and press it again to close the inventory. To display this inventory, we need a reference to it, so I'm going to create a new variable here, which I will call BP inventory. I'm going to change the type from boolean to WB inventory, and I want an object reference here. I'm going to drag and drop the BP inventory variable we created here. I'm going to get it, and from there I want to set its visibility to being visible. So the first node, A, would be connected to that, setting visibility to true. In that case, by default, it's visible, which is what we want. And from B, what I would need to do would be the same thing. So I could drag and drop BP inventory, get BP inventory, set visibility. In that case, I want it to be hidden. So that would be A to set it to visible and B to set it to hidden. However, this will not be enough because we have a variable BP inventory, we are making visible and hidden, but our reference is not mentioning anything. you can see that our default value of BP inventory is empty. This means that we need to check if our reference to our inventory is valid or not. To do that, I'm going to drag and drop the BP inventory again. I'm going to click on get. And once I have this node, I'm going to right click on it and I'm going to convert that to a validated get. This will allow me to check if this reference is valid or not. If this is valid, then something is attributed to the reference, to the variable. And if it's not, it means that the BP inventory is empty. And by default, it is empty. So first, if it is valid, if our reference is actually working, then we can go directly into setting this visibility to true. But if it's not valid, or in other words, this is the very first time I'm pressing the I key on the keyboard to open the inventory in the game, it will not be valid. So if it's not valid, then I need to create this widget and to create this reference. To do that, I will get a player controller. And from the player controller, I will look for create widget. Can move that up. So if our reference to the BP inventory is not valid, well, once again, this is the very first time I'm playing in the game and opening the inventory, the default value is none, so this is not valid, then I will create the widget for the inventory. In that case, for the class, I just simply need to get WB inventory. We are creating the widget now. And now, because it is being created, I can set the BP inventory variable, drag and drop, and then set BP inventory. Connect those two together, and I can get the return value of the create the inventory widget into this blueprint widget. From there, I can also go into add to viewport. So now I can add to the viewport this inventory user widget we created. And actually what I just thought about is I'm going to rename this variable BP inventory to widget inventory. Just going to compile. So this name change should make things a bit more clearer and to avoid confusion with the BP inventory and the BPC inventory we have from the previous video. Now that we have the visibility being set, and also if this is the first time we can create this widget, one thing I like to do here is to get a set input node. In this case, I want to get the set input mode to game and UI and connect the first set visibility we have and this add to viewport directly into this node. For the player controller, I'm simply going to get player controller here. This allows us to enter the UI mode when we press I for the first time, which will display the inventory, but also allows us to get into UI mode besides being on game mode. This makes it easier to interact with the UI now. And one thing I like to do is from there, from the player controller, I also want to get the show mouse cursor variable. I want to actually choose set show mouse cursor. Here we go. And I want to make that to true. So when we press the I key, we display the inventory, and this will also show us the mouse cursor. On the other hand, if I'm pressing the I key while the inventory is open, I don't need to be into the UI mode anymore. So I'm going to look for set input to game only. Can connect those two together. Here I just need once again a reference to the player controller. Get player controller. And from the get player controller, I also want to remove the mouse cursor. So set mouse cursor to false. Can compile and save. So all we're doing here is we press I for the first time. If this is the very first time we're pressing I, then our reference to the inventory widget is not working. So we're creating this reference to be used later on during the game. And by creating this reference, we also want to display the inventory because we press the I key. If I already created this, if this is not the first time I'm pressing the I key in the game mode, then our reference is valid and we go directly into setting the visibility of the widget. We are displaying the widget to the user. And on the other hand, if I am showing the inventory widget, because I press the I key, I want to exit this widget, I want to go back into the game, I can press I again to close the inventory. So now if I go into my game and press I, we can see that we have the inventory being displayed here. So this is the widget we created. And of course there is no item in our inventory yet, but also we are not displaying those items at the moment. And if I press I again, this removes the inventory and I can walk around. So just before we create the actual logic to display all the items in the inventory, I need to make a small point about the set input game mode and UI. When we do that, this doesn't mean that the player controller will stop moving. This only makes sure that we are accessing the UI inside the game. So if you want your character to not move, you need to add some extra logic, but this is beyond the purpose of this tutorial. If I go back into my WB inventory, we have this designer, but we can also access the graph here to actually code some logic. I'm going to remove all the base functions, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a custom event. So I'm going to look for custom event, so add custom event, and I will name this custom event create inventory. From there, this inventory will, this function, this event will take one input, which will be called inventory. And actually I'm gonna rename that create inventory UI. So it takes one input, which is an inventory, and this type will be struct item, what we created in the previous video. And if you remember from the previous video, we want to make sure this is an array of items and not just a single item. And from there, I will look for a for each loop. The array of this loop will be the array of items in the inventory. And for every item in the inventory, I will create a widget. And in that case, I'm going to create a item slot widget. So for every item in the inventory, I want to display the name of this item and the quantity of items we have. And as I mentioned in the very beginning of this video, we have created this WB item slot widget, this item slot widget that displays the name and the quantity of items we have. And this is all it does, and all of that is used in a vertical box to display all the items in a vertical way inside the inventory. So back into the graph of WB inventory, I am creating as many item slot widgets as we have items in our inventory. In that case, I also need to get a player controller. So for all the items we have, we create an item slot. I can create those item slots, but I need to make sure that they're not randomly spawned somewhere. They need to be children of this vertical box. So I'm gonna go into the vertical box, call that list item, and I'm gonna make it a variable. Back into the graph, if I compile that, we can see that we have list items now here as a variable. So I'm gonna get it. And from there, I will look for a function called add child. And I will connect that to the create item slot widget. So my list of items will add a child every time for every item we have, which will be an item slot. So the target is the list item, and the content is simply the child we are creating, or in other words, the item slot. Once we have that, from the array element of the for each loop, I'm going to look for a function called break struct item. This will give us all the variables inside the structure items we created. So what I want to do here is for every name, for every item we have, I want to display the name inside the item slot. Exactly what I have here. Instead of saying text block, I want the item name here to display the actual name of the item. So from the item slot we created, I'm going to drag the pin and look for item name and get item name. So this item name is a reference to this text block that we named item name. it is a variable, so we can access it in different functions, in different blueprints. In that case, this is what I'm doing here. And I want to set the text. I want to set the text of this text block to whatever the name of the item is. So I can drag the name here from the breakstruct item into the text of the setText function. Automatically, Unreal will convert the string directly into a text value. I'm going to connect those two pins together. I will compile. I will save. So this function creates an inventory UI that will display all the names of every item inside the inventory. However, this function right now is working, but it's not connected to anything. So I simply need to go back into the BP third person character, and from there, I'm gonna get my widget inventory again. And now that we have a function called create inventory UI, we can access this function here, and I can create this. So I'm simply gonna connect that to the logic from before that displays the UI. We can see that we need one argument called inventory. In that case, we simply get our BPC inventory from last video. So get BPC inventory, from there get inventory, and we simply connect that to the pin. We can save now. So now every time I'm pressing I, not only does it show the inventory widget, but it also shows all the items automatically. So I'm going to close, go into my game mode. I'm pressing I, we can see that nothing is happening except showing that our inventory is here. Since it's empty, there is nothing else. If I interact with objects here, I got a shield, and in here I got a sword. If I'm pressing I again, I should see in my inventory one shield and one sword. And we can see here we have shield and sword. And on the right side we have a text block because I did not define any quantity, but the logic will be the same, and we'll talk about that in the next video. This is it for this video. We saw how to create the UI for an inventory system and how to display every item directly into this UI. In the next video, we'll see how to update this inventory when we get multiple items of the same type. So this is it for now, and I will see you in the next video. Hello everyone. In this video, we'll see how to update our inventory, so every time that we add new items to the inventory, if we only have some of the same class, then it will just be added to this line without creating a new line. By that I mean that so far, the approach we have is that if I collect objects, so here I'm collecting one shield, here I'm collecting another shield, then I'm collecting a sword. If I go into my inventory, I can see that I have the 3 objects, but I have 2 shields that are on 2 different lines. And in that case, it will be more practical to have shield and then the number of shields that I have in that case too. To do that, we're going to create 2 different functions. One to actually update the inventory, and one to see if we only have an item in the inventory of the class that we are trying to pick up. If so, we update the inventory. If it's a new item, we just add a new item to the inventory, just like we saw in the first video. Now, before we start diving into the code for this video, I noticed one tiny problem in the code from the previous video when we are working on the UI. So back into the BP third person character, we have this flip-flop function that every time that allows us to open and close the inventory when we press the I key. And when we want to close the inventory, we first set the visibility to hidden, then we go into set input mode game only. So between those two things, what I want to do is simply set the widget inventory to nothing. So I'm just gonna set, and see here I'm not gonna select any assets, it's just gonna be empty, and I'm just gonna compile that, and we'll see in the end of the video why this can be a problem. To start off, what I will do here is go into my inventory, and in my struct item, I'm gonna add a new variable, and I'm gonna name that quantity. And the type would be int, and actually I'm gonna add a new variable called ID. Or in that case actually item ID, and this will be of type string. I will save that. Quantity and item ID will be the 2 variables we're going to use to identify objects and update first the number of items we have by updating the quantity field, and then the item ID will be used to see if we have one item or not in our inventory already, and if so we can update it, and if it's not something we have, then we add a new item to the inventory. So now that I have this ready, I can go into my BPC inventory class, where in the first video we created a function called add to inventory. Here I'm going to add a new function called update inventory. As the name indicates, this function will be used to update the inventory. First, I will look for a for each loop with break, connect that, and as an array, I will need to have an inventory. And in that case, I can just take the inventory we declared in the first video. So I'm looping through every item of the inventory here. Once I'm looping through every item, I'm going to look for a branch. And I want to check one condition. I want to see if this item is already in the inventory. So to check this, I'm getting the array element here. And from there, I'm getting a Brock struct item. We can see there's a lot of different variables here now. This is all the variables we created from the struct item. And in that case, what matters here is the item ID. From there, I'm going to look for equal. And in the string category, I want to look for equal exactly string. And I need to compare this string, so the item of the inventory that we possibly already have, I want to compare the ID it has to the ID of the new object we're getting. So the new object, just like we did in the first video, the update inventory function that we are creating right now has one input, which is, just gonna make that bigger, which is the item we are trying to add. So the item is of type struct item. So this is so far exactly like the add to inventory function. We have one input item of type struct item. This is the item we're trying to add to the inventory, and if we already have it, then we're updating the part of the inventory that tells us that we already have this item. And so from this item here, I will do the exact same thing, look for break struct item, and once again get the item ID, and connect that together. Can minimize that. So right now we're doing the exact same things on two different objects, the new item we're trying to get, and the item of the inventory that may possibly already have the same ID, or in other words, may already be in the inventory. So if this is the case, our branch, the condition of a branch, is matched. So if this is the case, then I will, for example, print like update inventory. And if this is not the case, I will print not updating. But obviously, this is not what we want here. This would be fine to debug options here, to debug what we're doing. But in that case, I don't want to simply debug. I want to have some logic to go forward. So with this function, what matters is just the true result of the branch. We don't really care about false, so I can remove this statement and not care about false. I will remove the first print string, and I'm gonna look for a sequence node because I want to do two different things. The first thing I want to do is increase the number of items we have. So we found that the item I'm trying to add to the inventory is already in this inventory. So instead of having one item in one line and the second item of the same type on a different line, what I want to say is on the same line, hey, I have this item, so actually quantity of this is not 1 anymore, but it's going to be 2. So in that case, I'm just going to update things by 1. So I'm going to look for a plus plus. In that case, I want increment int. In that case, I'm just increasing the value by 1, but if you want to have more, you can simply look for an add node. So I'm going to stick with the incrementation here. And what I want to increment in this case is the quantity here. I have this item quantity, whatever it is, I want to increment that by 1. I want to say, here, I already have this type of item, so I'm adding a new one to this. So now it's connected. So now that I know we can update the quantity I have, I need to update that directly onto the right item. I don't want to increase the number of swords I have. If I'm picking up a shield, I want to get the actual shield. So in that case, I want to look at the objects, at the object that is getting updated. So in that case, this is the array element where this condition was true, where this branch condition is true. From there, I will get the function setMembers instruct item. And I will connect that together. So I will update the object in the array accordingly. So I'm getting the right object, but I also need to update the quantity. So in that case, by default, the pins are invisible. So you can get more options here by clicking on the default category and showing quantity. So we have quantity here. This will update to 0. That's not what we want to. What we want is to have the current number plus 1. I just have to drag from the incrementation here to the quantity. So I'm getting the old quantity plus 1, and that will be the new quantity here. While it may seem that we should stop here, and because the logic has been achieved, we are updating the quantity, what we need to do here is actually get one more node called setArrayElement. I want to actually update my inventory array. I'm gonna get the inventory here, the variable I have. This will be my target array. We need to know which item at which index we're updating. So simply from index, go right back into at the very beginning, the for each loop with break. We connect that to the array index. So we're telling the engine that we are updating this inventory, and we're updating one specific item at the index of where the loop found that we have a match. And for the item, this will simply be the struct out that we get here. So that's it for the update function inventory. So I can compile and save. So now we have two different functions in BPC inventory, one to add a new item to it, and one to update the inventory in case we already have this item. And actually I just realized right now that in my sequence, this is the first part of the sequence, we're adding something to the inventory. The second part is once we've done that, we added something to a new inventory, we don't have to loop anymore. We got the right item we needed, we don't need to loop again. So we can just connect the second node of the sequence into the break of the for each loop. Just gonna make that look slightly nicer by adding pins here. Here we go. Here we go. And now I can compile and save. The second function will be into our interactable object. So I'm gonna open the BP interactable object that I have. And in there, we had this logic from the very first video, where if we are interacting with this object, we are adding the object to the inventory. However, this will not be enough, because right now we need to also check if we already have an item to update if this is the case. So, what I'm gonna do is move things a bit. As BP third person character cast we have, I'm gonna get it, and I'm gonna promote it to a variable. I'm gonna call that BP third person. This is not a necessary step here, this is just to help you make the code look cleaner, because things can get messy very quickly. So in that case, I can remove this connection here, and simply use my BP get third person here. This way, the logic for add to inventory, I will simply move it over here for now. So from the cast, we are setting a variable BP third person that we will reuse throughout the logic. And from there, I want a branch. And this first branch will check if the inventory is empty, like completely empty or not. Just gonna remove that. So in that case, I want to get the BP third person. So from there, from this third person character, I want to look for get BPC inventory. We're getting the component for the inventory. And from there, we can access the actual inventory. So get inventory. And an array function here is to look if this is empty. So I'm checking right now if my inventory is completely empty or not. And if my inventory is completely empty, I can go from the true node and connect that into the previous logic we had from before, where we simply add an item to the inventory. I don't need to make any modifications here, simply getting the data from the object and updating the BPC inventory based on the data here. So this is the scenario where nothing is happening. This is the very first time we're picking an item, or our inventory is empty for some reason and we're picking an item for the first time since that moment. We just have to add an item to it. That's it, we don't have to do anything else. But now we might already have items in our inventory, and then we need to check if it's going to be a new item that we're adding or not. So what I want to do here is get data table row. So I'm going to simply copy that, Control C and then Control V, and connect that to false. The data table is just like before the object to loot. So get object to loot and connect that to data table. In that case, the row name is item. This, because I copy and pasted from before, does not change, but make sure you have the correct name here. So once I have this, if the row is found, I will connect that to a for each loop, and once again with break. What we're going to do is get pretty much the same logic that we did for the update inventory function. We need to loop through the inventory. So in that case, I'm going to get BP third person, look for get BPC inventory, and from there, get BPC inventory, and from there get inventory. This sequence is something that you should be familiar with now because we've been doing that quite a few times. So I'm looking inside the inventory of my character, and in there, very similar to the update function, I want a branch, and the condition I want is to see if we have this item or not. So once again, very similar to the update function. So to do that, from array element, I will look for break struct item. Again, plenty of options here. I want the ID, and I want to compare that. So equal to, and actually equal exactly to the string. We want to make sure this is the exact same ID. And from there, I need to get the out row again, which will also break struct item. So once again, this is extremely familiar to the update function from before. This is pretty much the same logic. Once again, I need the ID here. And what I'm going to do from the out row is I'm going to promote that to a variable, which I will just keep it as out row. Make sure that you connect the set between the get data table row and the for each loop. So this is declared into our variable. Now I can remove this pin and simply drag it here. Once again, this is just to make the code look nicer and cleaner. So what we're doing is we're getting this object that we just found. We're comparing the ID of this object to the ID of whatever we have in the inventory. And if we have a match, aka if the item ID is the same, so these strings are equal to each other, we have a match. So the branch can then tell us what to do next. So if we have a match, then that will be using the update function that we just created. So from there, so I will get the BP third person, get BPC inventory, and from there get the function update inventory. Simply need to connect true to update inventory. Here we go. And we have one item here as an input for this function. In that case, this is just the out row. And if all of that is false, okay, we do not have this item in our inventory, then things are going to be very simple. We simply do the same thing, get the third person character, once again, get BPC inventory, and in that case, I want to add to inventory. Same logic here. We're adding the item to the inventory, and what is the item we're adding? Once again, this is the out row, so the item that we are actually interacting with. So in that case, here, this is the out row is just the result of the object to loot. This is just data inside object to loot. This is the way to access the data, so that's what we're doing. So we could stop right here and go into play mode and test out all of that, but there's something I noticed, an issue that can arise when you are using this logic, is that you need to also stop the for each loop. So we have a for each loop with break. There's nothing breaking it yet. So what happens is that those two things can happen right after the other. So once we are updating the inventory, we don't need to look into more functions this is it, we updated the inventory, that's all, we don't need to add a new object to it. And same if we're adding something to the inventory, we don't need to actually update it. Those functions can be used only one time, that's the whole idea. But if we don't break this for each loop, then they can happen at the same time, and that's not what we want. So in that case, I just want a sequence. I can move this sequence right here. Here we go. And the second part of the sequence is connected to break. Just gonna make that look slightly nicer, which is a bit hard with this kind of node, but hopefully it's not gonna be too messy. And for false, we also need to do the exact same thing. So in that case, look for sequence. Can move that a bit. And once again, the second part of the sequence, then one, is connected to the for each loop and to the break more specifically. So now everything should be fine. We can compile, we can save. One tiny thing I just forgot is once we have updated our inventory or added something new to the inventory, we can destroy the actor. This is something I did not mention in the first video, but this is very important. Once you pick something up, you can remove the actor from the world because it's technically now part of your inventory. So in that case, save and compile. And of course, also at the very top, when this is the first time we interact with the actor, we also need destroy actor here. So you should have in total add to inventory, then destroy actor one time, then you have it a second time at the bottom here, add to inventory, then destroy the actor. So you have to do that a grand total of 3 times, one for the very first time we add to the inventory. So this is the very first time the function add to inventory is called. We add something, we can destroy the actor now. And if we update the inventory, you can also remove the actor then. And if we have an item that was not inventory, that was not inside the inventory, but it's not the first time we interact, we have this add to inventory function, and we can also destroy the actor. So I can compile and save now. And make sure that your items, since we added new variables to them, make sure you update the variables here. So in that case, quantity is by default 0 for sure, but we need an item ID. In that case, my ID for the sword would be sword. Can save that. And for the shield, same quantity is 0. And item ID will be not sword this time, but actually shield. Just realizing for the quantity, I should by default put 1 and not 0, because otherwise they will start at 0. You can get that, save that for shield and for sword. And since we have the quantity that we can now display into the UI, we can go into the WB inventory that we created in the last video. And from there, we have the logic to update the name of the object we have, but now we also need to update the quantity. So now we can see that automatically the break structure item shows us that we have quantity. From the create WB item slot widget, we have a return value where we get item name. In that case, we can get item quantity. That was the name of the other text we had. And we can set its text to whatever value we want. So I can connect those two here. We first set the text of the name of the object, then we can set the text for the quantity. And the text we want is simply quantity. I'm gonna drag quantity from the break struct into the text. And automatically, once again, Unreal will change the text, the integer into directly a text value. So I can compile, save. So now I can finally test out everything. So if I open my inventory, we see that there is nothing in it. If I pick up an item here, we have a shield. Open it, we can see that shield is 1. And if I pick up a sword here, we have 1 shield, 1 sword again. And I'm going to pick up another shield. Unfortunately, I forgot to add a display text here, printing the string to say that we are getting a shield. But we can see when we open the inventory that we have now 2 shields instead of having 2 different rows with shield written on each of them. Now, before I end this video, I'm just going to go back to this tiny bug from the last video. If we do not set the widget inventory to nothing here, what happens is we are creating the widget inventory multiple times on top of each other. Every time you open the inventory, we would just be recreating this inventory again and again, so items will look like they are multiplied, even if it's not true. So we just have this set widget inventory variable to nothing, so every time we try to open the inventory, we are not recreating on top of each other this display of the inventory, but we're just showing it for the first time again. So this is it for this video. And in the next video, we'll see how to save and load the inventory. So I will see you in the next one. Hello everyone. In this video, we'll see how to save our inventory. To do that, I'll start by creating a new blueprint. So right click, Blueprint class, and I will search for save. By default, Unreal Engine has this save game blueprint that allows you to save any variable inside your game. In our case, this will allow us to save our inventory. So I'm going to choose save game, select, call that BP save, and I can open this new blueprint. And there, we will simply create the variables that need to be saved. The main logic will be done in the BP third person character. So we just want to save our inventory, so I will create one variable called inventory, just like we've been doing in the previous videos. And the type will be, just like in the previous video, struct item. Of course, I want to make sure this is not a single item, but an array of items. I can compile this, I can save, and I can close this blueprint. We are done for the BP save blueprint. Now I will go into the third person folder, to the blueprints, and I will open the BP third person character. I'll go to the very top, where by default Unreal Engine has this add input mapping section, and in there we can see we have the event begin play here. I will simply move that on the left side, and I'll create a sequence node. What we want is to keep this add input mapping. We want to make sure the mapping of all the controls is working in our game, otherwise we will not be able to do anything. So this will be the first thing in the sequence, and in the second order of the sequence, this is where I will implement the load and save logic. So I will look for a node called does save game exist. Here we want to see if we have a save game. We need a slot name for the save, so here you can manually create a name. In my case I will call that save1, keep it simple. Or you can simply have some logic to have some auto naming for your saving. Here we don't really want to focus on that, we just want to focus on the main logic. This will return a boolean value saying that yes, we have a save game if that's the case, or no, we don't have any save game. So I'm just gonna move things up a bit. Here we go. Here we go. So since we have a boolean value, we need a branch here. We want to see if we have a save or if we don't have a save. So I will simply connect the return value inside this branch. If we do have a save file, then we simply need to load the game. In that case, I can look for load game from slot. And this will load a game from a save slot. In our case, save1 is the name of the slot, so I will type that here, save1. Now, we are loading the game, but we need a bit of extra logic in this case. We need to actually load the variables inside our game. So I will look for a cast to, and in that case I want to cast to BP save, the class we just created, the blueprint we just created. I will connect the return value into the object, and in this case I will look for my variable that I created, aka in this case inventory. I will look for get inventory. So this way I'm loading the inventory from the save, but I need to attach that to the inventory of my character. So I will get my BPC inventory here, and from there I will look for get inventory. So in that case we have two different variables called inventory, one that is part of the save, which shall have all the values of our save if our game has been saved. And I want to load that into the current session. In that case I actually do not want to get the variable inventory, I want to set inventory. We want to define our current inventory to be what the save inventory is like. So I can connect the cast into this set. We have the target for the set variable, this is fine, but we need to actually set the variable itself, so we need to connect inventory from the BP save into the inventory of our current session. So simply connect the two pins together, and that's it, we have loaded our inventory. Now I want to focus on the false statement of this does save game exist. So if the game does not exist, I want to create a slot. So in that case I will look for a node called create save game object, which will create, as the name indicates, a save file of the game. In that case, I want to look for bpsave as the class, including this save file, but I need to make sure the variables inside the save file contain all the values of the game. So in that case, we're kind of doing the opposite thing. We're getting our BPC inventory. From there, I am getting the inventory. And from the return value of create save game object, I will look for set inventory. So we're doing the opposite from before. In this case, I want to get my current inventory and save that to the file to be used later on. So in that case, I can simply connect inventory into the inventory pin here and connect those two pins together. Now I want to make sure I am saving that, so I will look for save game to slot. The save slot will be, the name of the save slot will be what we did before, so save one. And while this will be enough to simply save and load our logic when we start the game, we kind of want to make sure we have another way to save the data whenever we want. Because right now, all of that happens when we start the game. So either we have a save file and we are loading the inventory, or we don't have a save file and we are saving the inventory. But all of this happens at the very beginning, so this is not really practical because we have no moment where we can manually save the game. For example, I've been playing for 2 hours, I don't want to save the game 2 hours ago, I want to save it now. So in that case, I will simply create some temporary logic just to show you the basics of how to save manually, but this can be adapted to having some UI, for example, where you can manually save everything. I'm going to look for a keyboard event, and here I will choose a random key. So for example, something that's not too annoying, P, let's choose P. And when I'm going to press P, I want to save the game directly. Of course, once again, it would be better to have a UI, but this is just for the sake of demonstration. If I'm pressing the P key, I want to look for does save game exist. We are pretty much doing the same thing here. We are checking if we have a save file already. So once again, looking for a branch, connecting the result of does save game exist into this branch. Of course, the slot name needs to be save1, the exact same name that we've been using before. And if this is true, if we have a save game, then I will save my inventory. So in that case, I'm gonna get bp inventory. I'm gonna get bpc inventory, and from there, I'm gonna get inventory. But like we did before, to save this to a slot, we could cast to bpsave, but a slightly better way to do that would be to create a variable for bpsave. I'm going to create a variable called bpsave. Its type will be bpsave. And I want to make sure this is an object reference here. So just make sure you click on object reference. So in that case, this bpsave, I can get it. From there I can access its inventory. So get inventory or set inventory. In my case, since I am saving every time I'm pressing the key P, I want to set the inventory to be what we currently have in our bpc inventory. I'm going to connect that here. And so if the save game exists, if we have a file called save1 that exists, so in this is true, then we are setting the inventory, we are saving our inventory directly into a file. And just like we did before, we also need to make sure that we are saving the game to slot. The save game object in this case can simply be bpsave, and the slot name, once again, I'm going to type save1. So in that case, the whole logic is I'm pressing P, I'm checking if we have a save file. By default, we will have a save file because of the event begin play logic we just implemented. So we can only focus on true. There is a save file, it exists, so I'm getting the content of my current inventory, what I have in my game, the bpc inventory, getting its content, sending that to the bpsave inventory, so I'm setting the value inventory to be what I have at the moment, and then I'm making sure the save is working correctly by saving the game to a save slot called save1, which we have been using from the beginning. And this logic, we only focus on true here in this logic because the even begin play, the very first time I'm gonna start my game with this save logic, I'm checking if we have a save file. In this case, we're pretty much doing the same thing, a bit differently, but the logic is the same. We are saving the content of BPC inventory into the inventory of the save file. But if that is not the case, that is the very first time we are playing the game, the save file does not exist yet, so this condition returns false, and we are creating a save file object, and we are saving the value of our inventory in there. If this is the very first time, because this is on even begin play, this variable will be, the inventory variable will be empty in both situations. So we're almost done, but since I added a BP save variable here, I also want to make sure that in this even begin play logic, I am setting this BP save to an actual value. So every time we press the P key, we do not get an error saying that BP save is none. We need to set that. So simply drag BP save here, say save BP set, connect that to the first output of the branch statement at the very end, after true. We are saving BP save to be as BP save here. This result will be connected here. So we are saving our variable BP save here to be the result of the cast, which is, it's the exact same thing. We're just saving this into our current variable in the game to make sure this is accessible every time we press the P key. And we also need to do that for the result of the false from the branch. So after the save game to slot here, getting BP save, set BP save, connecting here, and the BP save is simply the return value of create save game. Just gonna make this look slightly nicer. So now I can compile, and just to make sure everything is fine, I will simply print some statements. Like after I'm pressing P, all of that will say game has been saved. And I can compile here. I'll just focus on every time I'm pressing the P key. So I'm entering play mode for the very first time. Press I, my inventory is empty. By default, the even begin play logic has created a save file because we had none from the previous video. Now we created some logic to automatically create a save file if there was none. It is right now empty, our save is empty. So I'm gonna pick up an object here. Got a shield, should get another shield here. Picked up a sword. Looking at my inventory, I have 2 shields and 1 sword. Cool. Now I can press P. My game has been saved. Amazing. I'm exiting, taking a break. You know what? I'm gonna come back to the game. This is my second session. Now we have saved everything, so if I open my inventory, we can see I have 2 shields and 1 sword. So this is it for this video, and I will see you in the next one.